Hello everyone, this is Don Maurice. I hope you are well. This video is an excerpt from our March 27, 2014 webinar, the CFPB's Report on Debt Collection. What does it reveal? The CFPB recently issued two reports stating it had received a little more than 30,000 complaints concerning debt collection in 2013. Its consumer complaint portal showed far less, only 11,056, a difference of 19,000 complaints. Where are these missing complaints? Eric Rosenkoetter from the National Association of Retail Collection Attorneys offers this explanation of the missing complaints. He's joined by Reid of DBA International and Manny Newburger of Barron & Newburger. I hope you enjoy it.
The report, of course, deals with complaints. And there was a lot of data collected by the two agencies over the past year. But here's the thing we found out. What's wrong with this data? There's something wrong with it, isn't there, Eric Rosenkoetter?
Why, as a matter of fact, Don Maurice, there is. And the data is interesting. What's more interesting is perhaps what's not highlighted in the report with regard to the data. Just looking at the press release and the opening remarks in the report, the first thing that always jumps out at me, and of course it's the same thing that jumps out at me at the field hearings also, is that there's always a reference to the fact that there are 30 million Americans with debt that is in or subject to collection, and then always, several paragraphs down, there will be a reference that there are approximately 200,000 complaints every year with regard to debt collection. And of course, well, that hovers right around just 1/2 of 1% in terms of a complaint rate. And certainly there's a lot of work that needs to be done with regard to how debt collectors respond to complaints and prevent complaints from happening in the first place. And it's going to become even more evident as the CFPB moves forward with a lot of its initiatives. But still, that is a complaint rate that I think is remarkable, and in any other industry they'd be waving it around as a banner of their consumer friendliness. So it's unfortunate that we're not able to do that, and that the CFPB puts it right out there in front of us every single time they have an opportunity to speak with regard to debt collection. So I see you've thrown up my next slide there, Don. So
I have.
That. Thank you. And so the report refers to 30,300 consumer complaints. And for myself, and I know David Reid, and for probably a lot of folks who are listening in today, that didn't quite ring true to me, because at the end of the year of 2013, the last time I had looked, the complaints were hovering right about 11,000. And how did it get from 11,000 to 30,000? Well, here's how that happened. So the CFPB states in the report that they've received 30,000 complaints. That's not what shows up in the public database. What they've done, they have subtracted 5,000 cases that are pending with the CFPB or with the consumer. And they've subtracted 4,000 complaints that were incomplete. They've subtracted 10,000 complaints that were referred to other agencies, which leaves us with about 11,000 complaints that were actually sent to companies for a response from July of 2013 through December of 2013, the period of time in which they were taking complaints on debt collection. So we don't really get from the public database the same picture as what's being viewed by the CFPB, which is unfortunate. Now, looking at the slide, you can see that in some areas there's not a great amount of discrepancy. Certainly there's a shortcoming. The green, by the way, is the public database. The blue is what's reported by the CFPB pertaining to the 30,000 complaints. The biggest discrepancy has to do with taking or threatening illegal action. And I don't know why their numbers would be so much higher than what's available to the public, but I would suppose if illegal action was threatened, those might be the sort of cases that they would be more likely to refer to other agencies, be it state attorneys general or state regulators, rather than referring them to the company, and that would be in one of the categories that I mentioned that they don't include in the public database. So we've got a little bit of discrepancy with regard to that. Now, before we leave this slide, I wanted to point out that these are the 6 major categories that a consumer chooses from when they're on the CFPB website and filing a complaint with regard to debt collection. The first thing they do is pick out one of these categories. Once they pick the category, there are subcategories that drop down. So, for example, under continued attempts to collect debt not owed, there are actually 4 categories that would fall in that column. One is the debt is not mine, the other the debt was paid, identity theft issues, or the debt was discharged in bankruptcy. But I find it perhaps not as useful to refer to these specific complaints in terms of their relative percent within a column. I think it's easier to shake those columns out and see where the specific complaints lie with relation to one another. And Don, that would be the next slide.
Hey, Eric, while Don's forwarding the slide, I'm just curious, do you think the discrepancy between the 6% and the 14% on threatening illegal action could have something to do with phantom debt? Obviously, it's a real problem out there with phantom companies that don't actually own any debt, that are trying to con consumers into payment. And obviously, when consumers complain because they don't owe the debt, frequently, it would be categorized as under the debt collection category. So I'm wondering if they are, a certain percentage of that 30,300, which is not publicly available because it's been transferred to other agencies to be dealt with, perhaps is the phantom debt category, and should it even be listed as a complaint?
Well, that's a good point, David, and I do think indeed that at least in one of these categories that's excluded from the public database, the phantom companies, as you refer to them, would be in one of those categories. Which one, I don't know, but certainly researching this for today's webinar has raised some questions that I want to bring up with the CFPB next time I visit with them. And incomplete, for example, incomplete complaints, why would those be included in the 30,000 that they report if they're still incomplete? I don't know, but I think that is a good point. Now, with regard to the slide here, this is not...
Eric, I think Manny wants to jump in.
Oh, go ahead, Manny.
Just one point that I think is important in terms of what you and David are discussing. This phantom debt issue is a point on which the industry really needs to get aligned with the CFPB and the consumer bar, because there's a serious concern about companies collecting truly non-existent debts. And I can tell you, I've listened to some of the calls, I've seen some of the documents, and they're the sort of documents that neither of your trade groups would tolerate for 1 second. And I think this is really an important point, because to the extent that industry members come to recognize the existence of the problem and try to deal with it and get people to understand the difference between debts people don't remember or don't recognize and that which is truly phantom debt, really the industry and consumer groups are on the same side.